Are we really going to ignore the truth because it comes from a dog? Naomi Bennett's voice was steady, but the weight of her words was heavy. Marcus Gaines sat in silence, a man accused of a crime he didn't commit. The evidence against him was weak, built on assumptions. But the one witness who could prove his innocence, a retired K-9 officer, was being dismissed. Would the court listen, or was Marcus already judged before the trial even began? Speech balloon: will justice prevail, or will the truth be ignored? Watch now. Marcus Gaines had just finished dinner when the pounding on his front door shattered the quiet of the evening. His heart pounded as he approached, already sensing trouble. The moment he cracked the door open, blinding flashlights beamed into his face. "Marcus Gaines, step outside with your hands where we can see them," a voice commanded. Before he could ask what was happening, officers swarmed in, gripping his arms and forcing him against the wall. His mother, who had been folding laundry in the living room, rushed forward in panic. "Wait! What's going on? What's he done?" she cried. "Your son is under arrest for armed robbery," one officer snapped, tightening the cuffs around Marcus's wrists. Marcus's mind reeled. Armed robbery? His voice cracked with disbelief. "I didn't rob anyone." The officers ignored him as they read his rights. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering among themselves. Some shook their heads, others murmured, "I always knew he was trouble." Marcus clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of assumptions pressing down on him. At the police station, the accusations unfolded. A high-end jewelry store had been robbed 2 nights ago. The prosecution had surveillance footage of a masked suspect, someone with Marcus's height and build. Witnesses claimed they saw him nearby that evening. "But I was home," Marcus insisted. "I was with my mom all night." The detective across from him barely glanced up from his notes. "Your mother's not an alibi. She'd say anything to protect you." Marcus's frustration grew. "Check my phone. My location history." "It's already been checked," the detective interrupted. "You turned it off that night." Marcus's stomach dropped. He hadn't turned it off, his phone had died, and he'd left it charging in his room. But that didn't matter now. The case against him was already building, and with a biased system at play, he knew the truth wouldn't be enough. As they led him to a holding cell, Marcus realized that this wasn't just about proving his innocence. It was about fighting a system designed to doubt him from the start. Defense attorney Naomi Bennett sat in her dimly lit office, staring at the case file spread before her. Every piece of evidence against Marcus Gaines seemed damning: the grainy surveillance footage, the shaky witness testimonies, the so-called matching build. But something about it didn't sit right. She flipped through the police report again, her eyes catching a detail she'd skimmed over before. K-9 Officer Valor was deployed at the crime scene but did not alert to the suspect's scent. Naomi sat up straighter. A police dog had been at the scene. She knew trained K-9s were highly reliable in tracking suspects. If Valor hadn't picked up Marcus's scent, why wasn't that in the official court evidence? Why had the prosecution ignored it? Grabbing her phone, she called a contact at the precinct. "I need information on K-9 Officer Valor, where he was deployed that night and why his findings weren't included in the final report." An hour later, she had her answer. Valor had initially tracked a different scent, leading officers away from the crime scene entirely. But somewhere along the line, the case shifted focus to Marcus. The dog's alerts had been dismissed. "Typical," she muttered, shaking her head. If there was even a chance Valor's instincts had been right, Naomi needed to follow it. She tracked down his former handler, Amanda Torres, a retired K-9 officer who had worked with Valor for years. When Amanda opened the door to Naomi's visit, her face was unreadable. "You want to talk about Valor?" she asked, arms crossed. "Haven't thought about that case in a long time." Naomi didn't hesitate. "I think he had the right suspect that night, but his alerts were ignored." Amanda sighed, stepping aside to let Naomi in. "I won't lie to you," she said, grabbing an old case binder from a shelf. Valor was one of the best, but he was retired after that case. The department lost faith in his reliability. They said his alerts were inconsistent. Naomi flipped through the reports, her eyes narrowing. Or maybe he was right, and they just didn't want to listen. Amanda hesitated. You think they covered it up? I think Marcus Gaines is innocent, Naomi said firmly. And Valor might be the key to proving it. A long pause stretched between them before Amanda exhaled, nodding. All right. If you're serious about this, I'll help. But you need to be ready for pushback. No one's going to want to admit they were wrong. Naomi's lips curled into a determined smile. I never expect them to. Amanda Torres sat on the floor of her modest home, running her fingers through Valor's thick black fur. The retired K-9 lay beside her, his once alert ears now drooping slightly with age, but his sharp brown eyes still held the intelligence and loyalty that had made him one of the department's best. I know you never got it wrong, boy, she muttered, scratching behind his ear. They just didn't want to listen. Across from her, Naomi Bennett sat with a notepad in hand. Tell me about that night, Amanda. What happened after you and Valor were called to the jewelry store? Amanda sighed, leaning back against her couch. We arrived not long after the alarm went off. The place was already swarming with officers. They wanted Valor to track the scent from the crime scene, see if he could pick up a trail. And did he? Naomi pressed. Amanda nodded. Yeah. But he didn't go the way they expected. He ignored the back alley where the prosecution says Marcus ran. Instead, he led us 2 blocks in the opposite direction, toward the east side of town. Naomi's pulse quickened. And what happened next? Amanda's expression darkened. An officer called us back. Said they had new evidence pointing to Marcus Gaines and didn't need Valor's findings anymore. I argued, but they shut me down. Not long after, Valor was retired early. They said he was unreliable. Naomi clenched her fists. They didn't retire him because he was unreliable. They retired him because he wasn't cooperating with their version of the truth. Amanda exhaled sharply. That's what I started to believe too. But by then, I was out of the force. No one cared what I had to say. She glanced down at Valor. They dismissed us both. Naomi leaned forward. But now we have a chance to bring his truth back. If you testify in court, we can challenge their case. Show that they ignored crucial evidence. Amanda hesitated. You really think the judge will listen? He's been favoring the prosecution from the start. Naomi's jaw tightened. Maybe not at first. But if I can put enough pressure on the case, get the media talking, and expose the inconsistencies, he won't have a choice. Amanda studied Naomi's determined expression, then looked down at Valor. The old dog still held his head high, as if he understood what was at stake. All right, Amanda finally said. We'll fight. One last time. Naomi smiled. That's all I needed to hear. Naomi Bennett stepped into the packed courtroom, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The air was thick with anticipation. The case against Marcus Gaines had dominated headlines, with the prosecution painting him as a repeat offender finally caught red-handed. But today, Naomi had something they weren't expecting. She cast a glance at the judge, an older white man with deep lines on his face, his expression already set in mild impatience. Judge Whitaker had ruled against her on multiple motions, dismissing key evidence that could have helped Marcus. But this time, she wouldn't let him brush her aside. The prosecution's lead attorney, Michael Dalton, smirked at her from across the room, his confidence unshaken. He had every reason to believe the case was in the bag. After all, the jury had already seen the grainy footage of a suspect resembling Marcus, and Naomi's previous attempts to question the investigation had been met with resistance. Dalton rose first. Your Honor, the prosecution rests on clear evidence. Not so fast, Naomi interrupted, stepping forward. Before we move forward, I have a witness the court has yet to hear from, one who was present at the crime scene and whose findings were ignored. Dalton scoffed. Your Honor, the defense has had ample time to present witnesses. This is an unnecessary delay. Naomi didn't flinch. With all due respect, this witness was never given the chance to be heard. If the prosecution is so confident in their case, why not allow all the evidence to come forward? Judge Whitaker sighed. Who is this witness, Ms. Bennett? Naomi turned toward the courtroom doors. K-9 Officer Valor. A murmur rippled through the room as Amanda Torres entered, guiding Valor, the retired black German shepherd, to the witness stand. The once proud K-9 still held himself with dignity, his sharp eyes scanning the room as if assessing every person inside. Dalton stood abruptly. Objection. This is highly irregular. A retired police dog cannot serve as a witness. Naomi remained firm. Then explain why his alerts at the crime scene were never included in the final report. Explain why his tracking was dismissed the moment he led officers away from Marcus Gaines and toward another suspect. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, this dog was trained to detect criminals. His alerts were reliable in dozens of previous cases. And yet, the moment his findings didn't match the department's preferred narrative, he was pushed aside. Judge Whitaker frowned, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not inclined to allow an animal's testimony. Then allow his handler to testify on his behalf, Naomi pressed. Officer Amanda Torres was with Valor that night. She can confirm what the department tried to bury. Whitaker shifted in his chair. He looked at the prosecution, then at the expectant courtroom, where reporters had begun furiously scribbling notes. The weight of public scrutiny was growing. After a tense pause, he exhaled. I will allow it. But proceed carefully, Ms. Bennett. Naomi smiled slightly. That was all she needed. She turned to Amanda, who placed a hand on Valor's back. Let's tell them what really happened. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Amanda Torres took the stand. K-9 Officer Valor sat at her feet, his dark eyes scanning the room, his ears twitching at the murmurs. The tension was palpable. Naomi Bennett knew this was a critical moment. If she could prove that the police ignored crucial evidence, the entire case against Marcus Gaines could unravel. Amanda adjusted the microphone in front of her. I was Valor's handler for 5 years. He assisted in over 70 arrests, and his track record was one of the best in the department. She paused, glancing down at Valor before continuing. On the night of the jewelry store robbery, we were deployed to track the suspect. Valor picked up a scent and immediately led us away from the crime scene. Naomi nodded. And where did he lead you? East. 2 blocks away, toward an abandoned warehouse. A murmur spread through the audience. Naomi leaned in. Did he ever alert near Marcus Gaines's home? Amanda shook her head. Not once. Dalton, the prosecutor, stood abruptly. Objection. This is speculation at best. A retired dog's tracking is not concrete evidence. Naomi turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have something that is. She signaled to her junior investigator, who hurried forward with a flash drive. This is police bodycam footage from that night, footage that was conveniently left out of the prosecution's evidence. Dalton's expression faltered for the first time. Objection. This footage was never submitted. Exactly, Naomi said sharply. Because someone didn't want it seen. Judge Whitaker hesitated, clearly uneasy. Play the footage, he finally ordered. The screen flickered to life. The grainy bodycam video showed the officers following Valor down a dark street, away from the crime scene. The dog's posture was determined, his nose locked onto a scent. Then a voice crackled through the officer's radio, cancel the track. Suspect already identified. Return to the scene. The footage cut off. The room fell into stunned silence. Naomi turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this proves that the investigation was incomplete at best, and deliberately misleading at worst." Judge Whittaker's face was unreadable. But for the first time, Naomi saw hesitation in his eyes. The truth was slipping through the cracks. And she wasn't about to let it go. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. The grainy police footage still flickered on the screen, frozen on the moment when Valor had been called off the real suspect's trail. Naomi Bennett turned to the jury, letting the weight of the revelation settle in. The prosecution had built its case on the idea that Marcus Gaines was the only suspect, but now, with clear proof that officers had deliberately ignored crucial evidence, the foundation of their argument was beginning to crack. Judge Whittaker shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Dalton, do you have an explanation for why this footage was not included in the original evidence?" Michael Dalton, the prosecution's lead attorney, adjusted his tie, his confident smirk noticeably absent. "Your Honor, this footage was not deemed relevant at the time of the investigation." "Not relevant?" Naomi shot back. "An elite K-9 officer led police away from my client's neighborhood, but instead of following the evidence, officers ignored it and arrested Marcus anyway. That is more than relevant, it's deliberate negligence." Dalton straightened. "The defense is making assumptions. K-9 dogs, while useful, are not infallible. Perhaps the scent trail was old or confused." Naomi crossed her arms. "Are you saying Valor was reliable in every case before this one, but suddenly, on the night Marcus Gaines was accused, he became unreliable?" Dalton hesitated. "Dogs can make mistakes. So can people," Naomi countered. "And this footage proves that the mistake was not made by Valor, but by the officers who chose to ignore him." Judge Whittaker's jaw tightened. He was clearly looking for a way to dismiss the growing doubt, but the weight of the evidence was undeniable. The jury was watching, the press was listening, and Naomi wasn't letting this go. "I'd also like to revisit the store clerk's testimony," she continued. "The prosecution's key witness originally said they weren't sure about the suspect's identity. Then, after Marcus was arrested, they suddenly became confident. Why?" Dalton shifted uncomfortably. "Witness memory solidifies over time. Or it changes under pressure," Naomi said sharply. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the case against my client is unraveling. We have a police K-9's alerts being ignored, crucial body cam footage hidden from court, and a witness identification that conveniently became more confident only after an arrest. That's not justice, that's manipulation." Whittaker let out a slow breath, his fingers tapping against the bench. He had spent the entire case favoring the prosecution, but now, even he couldn't deny the growing cracks in the state's argument. Dalton cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the prosecution stands by its case." Naomi smirked. "Then it's time to see what else they're hiding." The fight wasn't over yet. But the walls were closing in. The courtroom was tense, a charged silence hanging in the air after Naomi's relentless questioning. The prosecution's case was falling apart, and Judge Whittaker could no longer brush aside the inconsistencies. But Naomi knew they needed one more push, something undeniable to shift the focus from Marcus Gaines to the true perpetrator. That push came from her junior investigator, who hurried into the courtroom, clutching a thick file. Naomi turned toward him, her pulse quickening. "Your Honor," she said, holding up the file, "we've just obtained new evidence linking a different suspect to the crime scene, evidence the police conveniently overlooked." Dalton shot up from his seat. "Objection. The defense is attempting to introduce new evidence at the last minute." Judge Whittaker narrowed his eyes. He had allowed Dalton to dominate the courtroom for most of the trial, but now, under public scrutiny, he had little choice but to appear fair. "Overruled. I want to hear this." Naomi took a deep breath. The original police investigation claimed Marcus Gaines was the only possible suspect, but we now have a new lead, a man named Daniel Reeves. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Reeves was an employee at the jewelry store up until 6 months ago, when he was fired for suspected internal theft. The store owner never pressed charges, but Reeves left under suspicious circumstances. And, as it turns out, he was seen near the store the night of the robbery. Dalton forced a chuckle. This is pure speculation. There's no proof Reeves was involved. Naomi smirked. That's where you're wrong. She turned to the investigator. Tell the court what you found. The young man stepped forward, holding up a police report. We compared the masked figure from the security footage to Reeves's build and gait pattern using advanced motion analysis. The match is significantly closer than it is to Marcus Gaines. But that's not all. We also obtained cell tower records placing Reeves near the crime scene at the exact time of the robbery. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dalton's face paled. Naomi let the moment sink in before delivering the final blow. The police had this information but dismissed it once they had Marcus as a convenient suspect. And why? Because it was easier to arrest a black man with a past than to conduct a real investigation. Judge Whitaker's expression hardened. He still didn't look pleased, but even he couldn't ignore the weight of the evidence. Dalton scrambled for a response. Even if Reeves was near the crime scene, that doesn't mean he committed the crime. Naomi stepped forward, locking eyes with the jury. Then why did the police ignore Valor's tracking? Why did they suppress the footage? Why did they rush to pin this on Marcus instead of following every lead? Silence. Dalton looked to the judge, desperate for a lifeline. But Whitaker simply exhaled, his fingers steepled. We need to hear from this Daniel Reeves, he finally said. Dalton slumped slightly. The case had shifted. The jury was seeing the cracks. And Naomi knew, this was the beginning of the end. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. For the first time since the trial began, the attention had shifted away from Marcus Gaines and toward Daniel Reeves. The name had been a shock to the jury, the spectators, and even Judge Whitaker, who had spent most of the trial trying to steer the case in the prosecution's favor. But now, with mounting evidence against Reeves, even he couldn't ignore what was unfolding. Naomi Bennett stood tall, her hands gripping the edge of the defense table. Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, the defense formally requests that Daniel Reeves be brought in for questioning. Dalton, the prosecution's lead attorney, looked visibly rattled. He leaned into his microphone. Your Honor, this is absurd. Mr. Reeves is not on trial. Not yet, Naomi shot back. But that can change. Judge Whitaker sighed, rubbing his temples. His reluctance was clear. Admitting this mistake would mean acknowledging the deep flaws in the case against Marcus. But with reporters scribbling furiously and cameras rolling, he had no choice. He turned to the bailiff. Bring Daniel Reeves in for questioning. Minutes later, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Reeves, a lanky man in his early 30s, stepped inside, his face tense. He had clearly not expected his name to come up in this trial. He avoided eye contact as he took the stand. Naomi wasted no time. Mr. Reeves, where were you on the night of the robbery? Reeves hesitated. I was home. Naomi arched an eyebrow. Then how do you explain your cell phone pinging near the jewelry store at the time of the crime? Reeves's eyes darted toward Dalton, who looked just as pale. I don't know. Maybe, I was just passing by. Passing by? Naomi echoed, her voice steady. That's interesting, considering we also have footage analysis showing that your build and gait are a closer match to the masked suspect than my client's. A murmur spread through the room. Reeves shifted in his seat. Naomi pressed on. Let's not forget that Officer Valor, the same K-9 officer who has been ignored in this trial, picked up a scent trail leading away from Marcus Gaines's neighborhood. A trail that led in your direction. Reeves swallowed hard. I didn't do anything. Dalton stood. Objection. This is coercion. Judge Whittaker hesitated but ultimately waved his hand. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Bennett. Naomi stepped closer. Mr. Reeves, the evidence is stacked against you. The police failed to investigate you, but we have. And if you continue lying, I guarantee you that you'll be the next one sitting at that defense table. Reeves's breathing grew shallow. He looked around the room, realizing the walls were closing in. Finally, his shoulders slumped. He let out a shaky breath. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, he muttered. I just needed the money. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel for order, but the damage was done. The real culprit had just confessed in front of everyone. Naomi turned toward Marcus, who looked stunned, his hands gripping the table. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. Judge Whittaker adjusted his glasses, his jaw tightening. He looked more frustrated than relieved, but he couldn't fight the truth any longer. The court will take a brief recess, he announced. But rest assured, this changes everything. And with that, the truth finally started to set Marcus free. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic mix of gasps, whispers, and frantic scribbling from reporters. Daniel Reeves had just confessed, not in a hidden interrogation room, not in a back-office plea deal, but here, in front of the entire court. For Marcus Gaines, who had spent weeks fighting for his innocence, the moment felt surreal. His hands trembled slightly as he exhaled, the weight of injustice still pressing on his chest. Judge Whittaker banged his gavel. Order. Order in the court. Slowly, the murmurs settled, but the shift in the room was undeniable. The once smug prosecution now sat stiffly, eyes darting toward the judge, searching for a way to salvage what was left of their case. Michael Dalton, who had been so confident in his pursuit of Marcus's conviction, looked utterly defeated. Naomi Bennett, standing beside Marcus, folded her arms and took a steadying breath. Your Honor, in light of Mr. Reeves's confession and the overwhelming evidence that my client was wrongfully accused, the defense moves to have all charges against Marcus Gaines dismissed immediately. Dalton scrambled for an objection. Your Honor, while this revelation is significant, we must thoroughly investigate Mr. Reeves's claims before making any hasty decisions. Naomi scoffed. Hasty? My client has spent weeks fighting a case built on ignored evidence, racial bias, and deliberate negligence. The only hasty decision here was his arrest. Judge Whittaker, ever hesitant, rubbed his temples. His discomfort was evident. If he granted an immediate dismissal, it would be an admission that the justice system had failed Marcus from the start. But with Reeves's confession, bodycam footage, and K-9 valors ignored tracking all pointing to Marcus's innocence, there was no room left for doubt. Finally, the judge let out a long breath and straightened in his seat. The court acknowledges the substantial errors in this investigation. Effective immediately, all charges against Marcus Gaines are dismissed. A wave of relief washed over Marcus as he sagged in his seat, his fingers gripping the table as if to ground himself. Naomi placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. But the victory, though significant, didn't erase the damage. As Marcus turned, he caught the expressions in the crowd, some relieved, some indifferent, and others still skeptical, as if even a public confession wasn't enough to make them believe in his innocence. The stain of an accusation, he realized, never fully fades. Amanda Torres, Valor's former handler, approached. The retired K-9 sat beside her, his tongue hanging out slightly, unaware of the role he had played in uncovering the truth. He never stopped believing you were innocent, she said, kneeling to scratch behind Valor's ears. Neither did I. Marcus crouched, running a hand over the dog's fur. Thank you, he said softly, not just to the dog, but to everyone who had fought for him. Naomi, meanwhile, turned her attention to the press gathered outside the courtroom doors. This case exposed more than just one wrongful accusation, she told them. It exposed a system willing to turn a blind eye to the truth when it's inconvenient. That needs to change. As she spoke, Marcus knew the battle wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about making sure this didn't happen to someone else. And as he looked down at Valor, wagging his tail, he realized justice wasn't just about proving innocence. It was about making sure the truth could never be ignored again. Marcus Gaines stepped outside the courthouse, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face for the first time as a free man. The weight that had crushed him for weeks had finally lifted, but the scars of the ordeal remained. Around him, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and bystanders whispered. Some cheered, some looked away, and some still watched him with doubt, as if an official dismissal and a public confession weren't enough to erase their prejudice. Naomi Bennett stood beside him, her arms crossed, watching the crowd carefully. "You don't owe anyone anything," she murmured. "You don't have to answer their questions." Marcus exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I know," he said. "But I'm going to." Stepping toward the press, he raised a hand to quiet them. "I spent weeks in jail for a crime I didn't commit," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. "I was arrested not because of evidence, but because I was convenient. Because some officers decided my past made me guilty before they even looked for the truth." The crowd listened, some nodding, some shifting uncomfortably. "But I'm lucky," Marcus continued. "I had Naomi. I had people willing to fight for me. I had Valor." He glanced down at the retired K9 sitting by Amanda Torres's side, the old dog wagging his tail, oblivious to the role he had played in uncovering the truth. "Without them, I might have spent years in prison for something I didn't do. But how many others weren't so lucky?" A hush fell over the crowd. "That's why this can't just be about me walking free. It has to be about fixing the system that put me here in the first place." He looked toward Naomi. "And I want to help." Naomi smiled, nodding approvingly. "We could use your voice." Later, as the commotion died down, Marcus found himself at the local K9 unit facility, watching the retired dogs train for new lives. He knelt beside Valor, scratching the dog behind the ears. "They called you unreliable," he murmured. "Said your instincts didn't count." Valor licked his hand in response, his tail thumping against the floor. Amanda knelt beside them. "He's still got a lot to give," she said. "They all do." Marcus nodded, a new sense of purpose taking root. "So do I." With that, he made his decision. He would dedicate himself to helping retired K9s find new roles in the world, just as he was finding his own. He would speak out, fight for those still caught in the system, and make sure the truth was never ignored again. Because justice wasn't just about one victory. It was about making sure no one else had to fight the same battle alone. And this time, he would be the one leading the way.